here. Thanks, Kay, for starting that recording. We are, again, as I said, really excited to have you here. I know a number of people have emailed and said they can't make it, so we're also going to post this on our website so people can watch this, or hopefully you can share it with other board members or other advocates at your college. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Casey and John to lead us through what this session is looking like and how you can help us be great advocates for making sure that we get the resources that we need to support student success at our colleges. Again, thanks for attending.
All right, thanks, Abby. Well, I am going to just get started here. Like Abby said, we're going to kind of run through, give an overview of the legislative session and our advocacy. Casey is very graciously going to be doing the slides. And why don't we go on to then the first slide? Can we go to the next slide? Yep. And then next, great. So I'm going to start just talking very briefly about the process. This is, as you know, a full legislative year. In the odd numbered years, we have full budget setting sessions. In the even numbered years, the legislature just meets for about a month in February. But you know, in late November, we got our after the elections, we got the committee assignments and leadership elections. Then the governor releases her budget on December 1st, and which has obviously already come out. We had the last legislative days; those are quarterly legislative meetings during December, and then the legislature starts with organizational days in that you can see that week in January 13th to the 17th. And then they started their official session started on January 21st. The next the next big piece, or the next big part of session for us, it will be when the Ways and Means co-chairs then release their budget. The governor does hers, and then at some point, and it's usually after the February quarterly forecast, economic forecast. That's generally when the co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee, who does all of the appropriations for the legislature, that's when they will typically put out their budget framework, and that really becomes the starting point for what the conversation is around the budget. The governor's budget is important when it's released, and then when the Ways and Means co-chairs put out their budget, that really becomes kind of the reference point. And then usually, and this isn't on the list, but usually around late March or early April, we will have our hearing before the Education Subcommittee for the budget bills we are looking at, like the Community College Support Fund, the Oregon Opportunity Grant. And then after the final economic forecast in May is when the legislature starts pushing out those major budgets. All of the major budgets tend to happen in either late May or at some point in June. And then on June 28th is the official end of the session. To continue past that date that's in the Constitution, they need a supermajority to continue on. However, the governor can also have a special session if they don't get their work completed. Next slide, please. Oh, and I should also say, feel free to stop me. I can't see you all. I can't see if your hand's up, so feel free to just jump in if you have a question. So these are some of the major committees we follow. Excuse me. In the Senate, it's just the Committee on Education. They don't have a specific higher education committee. All the K-12 bills and all the higher education bills go through the Education Committee in the Senate. This last year, Senator Michael Dembrow, who has been the chair of that committee for quite a while and was a huge community college supporter and former PCC faculty member, retired. And now Senator Lou Frederick, who's also from the Portland area, and a community college supporter as well. He is now the chair. Suzanne Weber from the Coast is remaining as the vice chair. There's only one new member on, well, there are two new members to the committee, but there's only Janine Solman from the Beaverton area has joined the committee, and then Noah Robinson is actually replacing his father, who passed away, Art Robinson, on the committee, and he's newly elected. And then the House, we on the Committee on Education and Workforce Development. One thing that has changed this year is that the committee is in the past was just higher education. In the last session, it is now higher education and workforce development. That's a good thing from our perspective, because it gives a good tie-in between the workforce issues and higher education issues. Unfortunately, so far, most of the workforce bills seem to be getting directed to labor and workplace. It's labor and workplace something, but which is typically the labor committee is where a lot of these workforce bills. It's often called labor and workforce, have gone, and it does appear so far that a lot of those workforce bills are actually going over to the labor committee. Interesting thing with the House Higher Education Committee is, you know, of the 7 members, Senate committees are only about 5 members typically, and then House committees are 7, just reflecting that the body is twice as large. And 5 of the 7 members of the House Higher Education Committee are new, not just to the committee, but to the legislature. They're all newly elected representatives. And so that's both an opportunity and a challenge. It's an opportunity to build new relationships and educate folks, but it also means they come in without a lot of background. However, we do have Zach Hudson, who's the chair. He's returning and has been on the committee before and has chaired. Lisa Fragola is a newly elected member, but is a former member of the Lynn Community College Board. So she obviously comes in with quite a bit of background. And then the vice chair, Darren Harbick, is newly elected, and he does not have an education background one way or the other. You know, like I said, I think there's some good opportunities here to reach out and make new relationships, and we are in the process of getting to know all of these new, particularly House members. Oh, next slide, please. These are some of the other committees that we follow. The Committee on Ways and Means. This is the full Ways and Means. So all the budgets that come up through the subcommittees end up in the full Ways and Means Committee to be passed out or not. Senator Kate Lieber is now the chair of that committee. She's the new chair of that committee, and Representative Tana Sanchez is returning as the chair of that committee, with vice chairs Fred Gerard, David Gomberg, and Greg Smith. The Ways and Means Subcommittee on Education. This is where all of the budgets will get worked, like the Community College Support Fund, like the university budget, the Oregon Opportunity Grant. They are all part of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission budget. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that bill. But both of these are new chairs to the, both Senator Solomon and Representative Ruiz are newly chairs of the Subcommittee on Education. However, Rep. Ruiz was, I believe, the vice chair in the last session and he was on the committee. So he's not new to the committee. Both are community college supporters. You know, Rep. Ruiz has been a really, really active supporter of colleges and for OCCA as well. And then finally, the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Capital Construction. This is one of the few subcommittees where a Republican actually is the co-chair. Usually they're vice chair because they don't have the majority. But for many years now, Senator Fred Gerard, who is a Republican, has chaired that committee and is continuing to do so. Representative Rob Noce is newly the co-chair of that committee, who is also has been a very good community college supporter. Next slide, please. So here are some of the key issues that we're looking at, or that the legislature is looking at in 2025. The first is housing, and I mean, I think everybody knows that, you know, Oregon in urban areas, but also in rural areas, faces like a lot of the country, a housing shortage. And this remains a top issue for the legislature. There's a lot of agreement between the House or between the legislature and the governor on this issue, that this is the top issue, and even among both parties. And then I would say the same with behavioral health, getting more behavioral health services out there, particularly in the area of addiction counseling, remains a top priority, or is the top priority, one of the top priorities for the session. This is another area where you have pretty broad agreement among both the legislature and the governor, which they often have competing priorities, even when they're the same party. And then, um, uh, and again, also quite a bit of agreement between Republicans and Democrats. And then early childhood education remains a priority, particularly for the governor. K-12 funding, K-12, because of the way their current service level is calculated, very similar to issues that both community colleges and universities have, are saying they will not reach their current service level. And so there is continuing conversation about either adjusting their current service level or finding additional funding. And then transportation, the legislature is this year hoping to put out a major transportation package. Interestingly, this has become a little more difficult because Oregon funds its transportation, major transportation packages with the gas tax. And whether you're driving a gas car or a hybrid or an electric car, the consumers are burning less gas than they used to. The gasoline cars just are more efficient. Some cars don't burn very much or don't burn any at all. So it does provide challenges for the state when they're trying to fund transportation packages, and they are looking at potential other ways of doing that, like a mileage tax or other ways of getting at that. And then a bit less so than last session, but still significant. We have a lot of new members, 19 freshman legislators. There have been a significant number of turnover and retirements. And again, you know, that's both a challenge and an opportunity to build new relationships and look for new champions. But it also means we have more kind of heavy lifting to do in getting legislators up to speed with our issues and getting them knowledgeable. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about some of the major bills of the session. The first is House Bill 5525. This is the Higher Education Coordinating Commission budget, the agency budget. We are part of that budget. The Community College Support Fund resides in that budget, along with the Oregon Opportunity Grant, along with the Public University Support Fund, along with the Oregon Promise Program. All of those, you know, higher education related programs are under the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, along with workforce, with a significant portion of state workforce funding. Currently, that bill, when they put budget bills out, they use the governor's recommended budget as the starting template. And again, once the Ways and Means co-chairs put out their budget, these numbers become a little bit less important. But currently, House Bill 5525 identifies $858.9 million for the Community College Support Fund. What we estimate would be needed to maintain a current service level, which just simply means the colleges are able to keep doing roughly the same level of service that they're currently operating at without major tuition increases. The model that we used to come up with the $920 million included statewide average tuition increases of 3% per year. So it does take tuition into account, but what we say we need is $920 million. The 858.9 is a lot closer to what the state budgeting offices, which is the Legislative Fiscal Office for the legislature, and Department of Administrative Services for the executive branch. And there are some key differences when budgets are built, and one of them is what we spend on areas like healthcare is usually roughly double what goes into the current service level calculation that the state uses. Salaries this time were considerably, salary increases were a bit higher than usual, significantly in many cases, reflecting the high inflation that have been seen around the country, particularly around food and housing. So what we would again need is about 920 million to get to that current service level. There are some other areas where the state current service level doesn't capture, but those are two of the major ones. The other thing we work into our current service level calculation is any unfunded mandates. So almost every session, the legislature passes at least one policy bill that there is not funding for, that will usually cost some amount of money to usually both community colleges and universities. When we build our current service level, we try to build those. We do build those into the current service level, so we can try to recapture those costs in the upcoming session. Next slide, please. Um, um, it also lists 276 million for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. That's the general fund portion of the Opportunity Grant. There is another about $24 million that comes out of lottery, and there's I think another fund. But the general fund piece is 276. The full program is 300 million. We are part of a coalition that is asking 450 million. That's a 50% increase. It's candidly not likely, but the coalition, which includes the universities, OCCA, labor, and students, all kind of agreed that we wanted to have an aspirational, very aggressive ask, because that program is so underfunded when particularly when you compare it to our neighbors to the north and south. Next slide. All right, House Bill 5505. This will be is the capital construction funding bill. The community colleges use Article 11G funds, which have to be matched dollar for dollar at the local level. This year we have 3 colleges up. One thing about the way the state does capital for us is colleges currently can ask for a project every 4 years. And the idea with that was, if a college comes forward in a session, gets a request, it usually takes them some time to get the match. And so they wanted colleges to come every other session, and which is in statute and what we have been doing. The other thing to know about capital construction, and this is for community colleges, and this is part of why the state gets a little hesitant to fund every year, or to fund every college every biennium, and to make the numbers too high, is that unlike universities, the state doesn't own community college buildings. So when we get Article 11G bonds, the state is bonding for these. This is basically money that they are where they're selling bonds to raise money, and all of the money that they give to community college counts against their debt to asset ratio, because they don't own the asset of the buildings. When they give universities money for capital construction, it counts as an asset, so it counts toward their debt to asset ratio. And if they were to give community colleges really high amounts of money from Article 11G, it could potentially lower the credit rating essentially for the state. So that's one of the challenges we have. We're going to be, and we'll talk about this a bit later, be asking for that cap to go up to 14 million this session. Next slide. So Senate Bill 478 is a policy bill, but we have it in here because it's related to governance, and it is a priority 1 bill for us. We prioritize bills from 1 to 4, with 1 being the most important. And those are typically only the budget bills, but also anything that significantly could change governance structures for the community colleges. And I'm actually going to jump to the last bullet point on this slide to talk about that, because this is one of the major pieces that really would change the way community college boards function. And it would mandate that every community college have a voting board member who is a full-time student. This would be the only mandate on an elected governing body in Oregon that mandates that someone who didn't go through the normal election process gets a voting seat on the board. That's I think the first major issue we have with this. Something that occurred to me just this morning is that if you added 1 student voting to the board, to each board, you would have an 8-member board, and it would be very difficult to break any ties because you would have an even number. And if you said, well, then we need 2 students, you're getting, and I didn't have time to run the numbers, but it would be something over 20% of the voting members would not have been elected. So, this is a real issue for us that I think that really, really fundamentally undermines, um, democratically elected governance. And so that is why we have elevated that to a priority 1. I think one of the things that might come out of this is potentially a mandate for a non-voting member. I think that's one of the compromise points that we're looking at if it gets to that point. The other thing that it does, or one of the other things, and now I'm going back to the top of the list, but is it requires boards to approve college membership in state or national associations. This again is something that is not a requirement of any that we can find, either elected or appointed board. The universities don't do this. They don't ask K-12 to do this. They don't ask the legislature to do this. So I think this is, something that is a bit puzzling to us and doesn't seem appropriate because only community colleges would be under such a requirement. And also, because there are so many, whether it's groups that faculty members join related to their disciplines, or national groups that business officers or other administrators are part of, this would be potentially hundreds of memberships that the board would have to take on. And so it would, while we think it's inappropriate, it's also could be particularly cumbersome. The other thing it does is allows for $500 a month stipends for board members. It also allows community colleges to reimburse board members for expenses. You already can. So that I was a bit surprised even made it into the bill. Legislative counsel who drafts the bills often does not put in language that is already current law, but they did in this case. And then it requires board members to have official email addresses put from the college that they have up on a website. When the OCCA Legislative Committee looked at this, that was the one piece I would say where folks in particular did not have a problem with. I think we would, and I will be recommending to the board next week that we oppose this unless significantly amended. But I think the legislative committee agreed that that would be a hard thing to argue against. It is also it's also a mandate that the universities already have. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to go into our legislative priorities. These were adopted by the board at the last OCCA board meeting. And the first, and I'm going to say these very quickly because we'll go into a bit more detail, is obviously the Community College Support Fund. Then to raise the cap on our community college capital construction projects, funding for the Oregon Opportunity Grant, resources for student basic needs, funding for the transition to co-requisite student support models, and then an adult reconnect work group. And we'll talk a bit more about what all that means. Next slide. Okay, so again, here's the Community College Support Fund. The agency budget for the CSL had 858.9 million. The governor's recommended budget included 870 million for community college funding, but what they included in community college funding includes things that are usually outside the Community College Support Fund. So I think the real number for the CCSF is that first one, 858.9. The 870 figure includes things like the contract that community colleges have with the Department of Corrections. That comes out of the Department of Corrections budget, but ends up as revenue for the colleges in that program. So it is not part of the Community College Support Fund, but it is part of total Community College 7 funding, and that's what makes up that 870 number. And then again, the true current service level that we see is 920. It's worth saying that even at that number, many of the colleges will still be required to make cuts. There for a variety of reasons, but it's a composite number, so it is sort of the number that you would need across, or that would average, but there will be colleges who are kind of above what the average increase would be, and so you'll still have colleges making cuts. We have seen over the last 2 years, costs at the colleges have gone up well over 10%. And but then relative to revenue, the gap that we have to get current service level funding is 15.7%. So that's the increase that would be required to get us to that 920 million. So that's a little over, well, almost 8% per year of the biennium. And again, this was driven um, by cost increases in healthcare, in salaries. Those are two of the major areas. And then colleges are still sort of digging back from the pandemic, when enrollment fell nationally for community colleges so far that revenue losses are still, we're still kind of climbing out of that hole. The good news is fall FTE for this year, this last year statewide, was up 7%. Headcount was up 4.3, but that FTE number, and that's how the Community College Support Fund gets distributed. That's really the important one here. And 7% is a really good, healthy number. I think it would have been very difficult for us to come back to session had that not been a good, healthy number, because we have been getting increases, even though our enrollment has been going down essentially since even before the pandemic. But as you can see here in this headcount slide, the progress, we really, it really has turned around. Students are students are coming back to community colleges, particularly in CTE programs and career and technical education programs and short-term certificate programs. And what I usually say to legislators is that's great news for the state and for those communities and for those students, because it puts students directly into family wage jobs in high demand areas. However, they're also the most expensive programs that community colleges offer. So this puts real fiscal pressure on the colleges, because we aren't getting as many of those lower division transfer students relative to how many students we're getting in career and technical education programs, which are, again, the most expensive, with nursing typically being the most expensive. Next slide. Okay, so capital construction funding. So as I said before, about colleges are currently capped. You can only receive from the state up to $8 million for capital construction projects that then have to be matched at the state level. That has been the same number since 2005. And if you adjust for just consumer price index inflation, it gets you to about a little over 14 million, and we kept it at 14, in part because I think that's already going to be an eye-popping increase for legislators, even though it's fully justifiable when you look at how long it's been at that number, particularly when you think about construction inflation, which is typically higher than consumer price index inflation, especially in the last 5 years or so, when construction costs went up significantly. So this is something we're asking the legislature, is to have that cap removed to 14 million. That would begin not this session, but the next session. So the projects that we have in this session are still at that $8 million cap, because that is current law. Next slide. All right, Oregon Opportunity Grant funding. Again, we are asking 450 million, along with a coalition of other folks. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but this is one of the areas in particular where Oregon lags relative to other states when you look at the amount of funding per student that goes into state financial aid. We are definitely, I think it's still in the bottom third of the country there. And again, this is more of an aspirational ask. I think it's unlikely that we would get to 450 million, particularly because last session they added 100 million. It went from 200 to 300. That's a really healthy increase, and very uncommon of a number for an increase, raising by over or about a third. And then, and this also, and so again, this will be, it's an aspirational ask, but we're working with a coalition of other groups. So we won't be the only ones saying this aspirational number. Next slide. All right, the student basic needs funding. I mean, this is an issue we all have been hearing more and more about, right? And all of the campuses now have food pantries, housing is, most students in surveys are saying that housing is a bigger barrier to them getting an education than tuition is. This is another bill that we've been working on with a coalition that provides $10 million in investment to go to both colleges and universities for programming, direct programming for student basic needs. The other thing that I think is increasingly important about this proposal is we had about $10 million allocated to colleges and universities so that every college and universities would have at least one benefit navigator. These are the administrators. These are the college employees who work with students, helping them to find and attain benefits like SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as kind of food stamps, and things like that, where there might be federal or state aid that students don't know about or how to navigate getting. And so the governor's budget zeroed out the funding for those for that program, which is, I think, would be particularly difficult for smaller colleges who have really counted on that money to be able to afford these positions, which I think all of the colleges have found to be extremely useful. And I will say too, this program has been very popular in the legislature. I think we have a decent chance of getting that money funded back. This bill could be the vehicle, but it is, this remains one of the top needs for our students. This was before the Oregon Student Association dissolved earlier or late in 2024. This was their top priority for the session. Next slide, please. All right, co-requisite support funding model, or support model funding. Said that backwards. So for anybody who hasn't heard this before, I'm just going to give a quick explanation here. But for courses like Math 111 and Writing 121, and we call these gateway courses because students really need to complete these courses before they can move on to other courses in their college education. And often, way too often, students are put in developmental education courses. And if you're trying to get to Math 111, you might be put in 3, even 4 courses of Math 60, Math 70, Math 80 before you get to that college level course. Nationally, the chances that students make it through all of those sections of developmental ed is about 1 in 4 students make it to actual college level. But when you change that model and put students directly into the college level course and then put them into a support course concurrent with their college level course, the numbers nationally, the numbers that we see, they about triple their success rate. They go from a 1 in 4 chance of making it to the college level course to a 3 in 4 chance of making it to the college level course. So this has a proven track record of success for students, but it does require additional training and potentially curriculum of development for faculty, and that is really what this one-time appropriation would be for. It's a very modest number, and one time to help accelerate the transition to co-requisite education. Next slide, please. All right, Adult Reconnect. This is really aimed at those students that are some college and no degree or certificate. That is the largest cohort of learners in the state of Oregon, some college, no degree. So this is really aimed at those students. And we lost an awful lot of those students through the pandemic. And so this proposal was also was designed at trying to recapture some of those students to try to get them back. And what we've kind of seen, I think, what across the country is that it isn't necessarily easy to get students, if they dropped out of the University of Oregon, to come back to the University of Oregon later in life, because they may have left for a reason. Their needs have changed as they've gone off into the workforce, and that programs work better when you connect a former student to an institution that has the education or the training that they need specifically for where they are in their career and at that point of their life. And it very well may be a different institution than the one they were originally involved in. So this is simply a work group to develop a proposal and funding to start a robust adult reconnect program. There are a couple of bills in session that will be dealing with this, apart from the one that we have. One by Representative Ruiz that would put either, it hasn't come out yet, but it's either going to be 4 or 5 million to probably find a contractor to do the outreach to try to reconnect students. But there is also a bill by a specific contractor who's hired a lobbyist to send money directly to an organization or a company called REUP. I think for our part, and I assume for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, we would prefer the bill that that gives money to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission to do an RFP process to find a contractor. I don't think we want to presuppose probably what the contractor should be so much as have as you would almost any other time for a state, for significant state funding, go through an RFP process. Next slide, please. And now I'm turning it over to Casey.
All right, thank you, John. So we have a number of advocacy opportunities for you. And going to go over each of those and then also take you over to our website. So CTE Month is one of our first opportunities to really highlight the colleges, and that takes place in February of every year. It's part of National CTE Month. And we used to, up until 2019, we used to have a day at the Capitol, CTE Day, where colleges would come and they would highlight and show demonstrations of a number of their CTE programs. Legislators would come down. We'd be in the rotunda of the Capitol. We'd be out on the front steps and in that where you first drive up, we had the big trucks, fire trucks, the trucking school, big semi trucks, and we've had wood-fired pizza ovens. We even had Southwestern has a ice carving person. They carved out of ice our budget ask. That was really cool. But then COVID hit. And so we were unable to be at the Capitol in 2020 and 2021. And then also around that same time in 21 is when all the construction started, the seismic construction and other updates at the Capitol. So it's really limited our access and we haven't been able to be there. So unfortunately, that's meant since 2019, we have not had an in-person CTE day. During COVID, we were able to do some virtual, we call them Workforce Wednesdays, when we were on Zoom and invited legislators to come and colleges were featured each week. But once the legislators were back in session over these past couple of years in person, they stopped attending our virtual CTE Workforce Wednesdays. So we stopped doing those, and really our focus this year, as we're sort of stymied by Capitol construction again, with just really doing social media posts, and then we'll do a one-click politics campaign. And I'm going to go into one-click politics here in just a few moments, but we'll be really just pushing through social media. We're working with the campus advocacy coordinators and CTE deans to highlight our CTE programs. There will be each week is a different kind of career theme for the colleges to post on social media and highlight with their legislators. So that's really what we're going to focus on this year, and then keeping our fingers crossed that we will be back at the Capitol for an in-person CTE day in 2026. Our next opportunity is actually on February 13th. There's going to be an Oregon Opportunity Grant Lobby Day, and will be in person at the Capitol, and we'll have a number of folks there from the colleges to talk to legislators specifically about the Oregon Opportunity Grant and getting to that $450 million number that John referred to earlier. We'll also do, again, a one-click politics campaign around that. And some students will be at the Capitol. Portland Community College has been a really great at spearheading this whole day. Our Community College Lobby Day will be March 6th at the Capitol, and this is in coordination with the Legislative Summit, which you will receive an email here, many of you later today, and it'll be on our website to register for the Legislative Summit. Registration will open this afternoon. That is March 6th at the Salem Convention Center. We'll have legislators there to talk about policy, to talk about higher ed budgets. We'll have a keynote speaker, we'll have students. It's going to be a really great opportunity for you to come and learn more than just this 1 hour session we're having today on our priorities and how to message, all to prepare you to go the next day, March 6th, to the Capitol to lobby with your local legislators. And so that'll be a really great opportunity for you to meet your legislators and to lobby for our priorities. Then in May, we'll be doing a Community College Day of Action. And we did this, started doing this about 2 years ago in the last long session, and then did another one during the 35-day session in 24. And it's an opportunity for us to take one day and hit our legislators hard with messaging. We have students reach out, faculty, staff, board members, community partners, and stakeholders. Really, this is a chance for one day to get as many people as possible to contact legislators. And it was hugely successful in 2023. It was very successful in 24. And we're really hoping to have a great Community College Day of Action again this year. I would anticipate that once we're able to be back at the Capitol more fully in the future, we will try to do something in person as well. But this year we'll be focusing on the messaging and social media posts. So one-click politics. Some of you who've been around for a few years may remember Voter Voice, and that was a platform that we used to easily send messages to your legislators. One-click politics is just a different platform, same concept. We just retired using Voter Voice and instead moved over to one-click last year. It has a very similar setup where you can go into the platform, which is online based, and you just enter your address and it will automatically populate your legislators. So if you're not sure who they are, some of our areas have significant numbers of legislators, like the metro area. And so it might be hard to remember who those are, especially with so many new legislators this year. With one-click politics, you don't have to think about it. You just enter your address, it automatically pops up those legislators. And then OCCA goes in and automatically populates messages for you to send. And so we have one getting ready to start next week for CTE month. And so that has about 8 to 10 messages that will automatically send one just for you from your email to your legislators. And it'll be one of those 8 to 10 messages. And we have so many because that way they don't get stuck in spam boxes. They don't, the legislators' email systems don't see like all the same emails coming in and think it's junk or spam of some kind. And so oftentimes it'll toss them into like a digest type message where it collects them all into one and then they may not see it. With how we set it up in one-click politics with multiple types of messages that go out, all essentially saying the same thing, but in different ways, it helps to ensure that they truly do receive those messages. It also gives an option to make a phone call, to go onto X, or formerly known as Twitter, and send a tweet to your legislators. And then one of the things we really liked about one-click platform is the video messaging option. And that allows students to do or anyone, but we're really going to push students to do a 30-second message to legislators. So for the CTE month one, for example, we'll be asking students to talk about what program they're in at their college and why they chose to go to community college for that CTE program and how they're hoping it helps get them a job in their community. So again, you only have 30 seconds to do it, but our students in particular and a lot of people are used to very quick messaging these days with things like on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. Everything is very quick, short, so folks are used to that. So we'll be doing one-click campaigns throughout the legislative session. And then we'll also have our Ways and Means hearings. John referenced in kind of the timeline that he gave at the beginning of the session that OCCA does a presentation on our budget to the Subcommittee on Education for the Joint Ways and Means. And this is our opportunity to really highlight why we're worth being funded fully. HEC does a great job of providing information and data about the colleges and about our funding. We try to tell a true story about our colleges and our students and the impact they make on our workforce and our economy. And so we're the ones who sort of put the face on all the data that HEC provides. And so there is a public hearing opportunity in that to provide written testimony or oral testimony. And so once we know when those dates are, they do change up a bit until almost the day of, but once we know when those dates are, we will make sure to get that information out there so that if you are interested in providing testimony, you have the opportunity to do so. So I'm going to talk a bit about our online advocacy toolkit. And while I do have a slide for this, I'm actually just going to take you right over to our webpage. So I'm going to switch over here. Give me just a moment. Nope, wrong one. Sorry about that. Too many things open. Okay. There it is. Okay. So this is OCCA's website. If you've never been there, OCCA17.com. And if you just go up to the top and under advocacy, well, first I'll show you, if you just go to advocacy, there is down here under take action, you can sign up for those one-click politics campaigns. So if you want to receive a notification whenever we have a new campaign available for you to take action on, just fill out this quick little form and we'll get you into our system. We also send out the information in a variety of other ways, including the OCCA Digest and via email to our board members and to our colleges. So we try to get that information out as many ways as possible, but this is one of those ways, and we'd love for you to get signed up if you are not already. And then also at the top, you can either go under advocacy and click on Advocacy Toolkit, or it's also available here as a button on our page on advocacy. And that takes you to our 2025 legislative session toolkit. We've done this for the last 2 years, and it's been a really great opportunity for us to make sure our advocates feel as prepared and informed as possible when you're out there advocating, whether that is meeting with a legislator, sending a message, doing a testimony, or even just talking with your colleagues. We want to make sure that you have the information you need about our priorities so that you feel informed. And so our toolkit has informational one-pagers. So right now we have them on our budget as well as on the capital construction cap increase that John referred to earlier. So these are things that you can actually leave behind with legislators when you meet with them or email to them. So feel free to download them, print them as many times as you want, but it's a great leave behind item and also provides you with some quick information about those topics. Our talking points, we currently have them up on the budget as well as on Senate Bill 478, which John referenced earlier, that could significantly change the duties and governance for our board members. So these are more not something you leave behind, but just provides you with guidance as you're talking with legislators and others so that you feel prepared and informed about that topic. We will eventually have some testimony templates, both for oral and written testimonies. As those opportunities come up, we'll post those here. And then we also have letters to the editor templates here. So we have some for board members and for students right now. And so you can use these. We have a variety of options for board member letters to media about workforce and community colleges' impact on workforce. And so feel free to download those and tailor them to your personal experience and story and send those to local media. For students, we have a variety of options right now on the affordability of community college, and then another one advocating on our $920 million CCSF. So we provide lots of options so that you can find one that best suits your needs and tailor it to you. And they're all structured so that they meet a lot of media outlets require you to have 250 words or less for a letter to the editor. Some allow a little bit more, but these stay within those parameters. And then we have a variety of other advocacy resources. As I mentioned earlier, there are a variety of ways to be an advocate. So we have a little sheet on that. We have some lobbying tips. We did an advocacy training, virtual training back in October. And so the video of that recording of that training is here, as well as the PowerPoint we used in that presentation. There's some guidance for social media during the session for campuses, information about CTE month, and then a presentation about sort of the community colleges 101. And that's something that John actually presented last week to the House Higher Education Committee during an informational hearing. So the advocacy toolkit really is something that will be updated throughout the legislative session. It won't just be this stagnant page that you see now. I try to put dates when we add new items, so that way you know really what it is that that's the most current thing available to you. So I'm going to go back to our presentation here. And I think we're actually towards the end and are ready for questions. So John, if you want to pop back on here as well, we would welcome any questions from folks. Feel free to use your hand signals. Maybe what we'll do is I'll actually take us off of the PowerPoint here so we can see everyone a little bit easier. So you can feel free to raise hand or put your question in the chat. Yes, I see a question from Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you so much, OCCA, for this great presentation today. I had a question related to the statement of advocacy that you all shared that I believe some or most of our boards presented to our full boards for approval. And here locally at Linn Community College, I believe we approved that in our January meeting. Can we say with confidence that everybody's in, I mean, throughout the state, or either has approved that or is expected to?
Close. I received another one this morning from Klamath Community College that their board approved. What Jeff is referring to is we asked the boards of education at all 17 colleges to consider approving a resolution in support of the OCCA legislative priorities for the session, or a version of it. We provided a template that they were welcome to modify, if they wanted to accept some, but not all of the priorities. So we have received a lot of those. There's a few boards that haven't met yet. But I know we won't have anybody contesting any of them, but we don't have all 17 yet. So I'm still waiting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Other questions?
Well, we welcome questions. I want to thank Casey and John for putting this together and always being available for resources and advocacy and staying at the Capitol. I also want to recognize Katie Archibald and our Member Services Committee. So these Lunch and Learns were really born out of that committee, their interest and their goal in ensuring that we have resources and trainings and that we are providing information. So we do this every single month. And again, in the chat, Katie added the registration for our legislative days. We really would love to see you come to that. And again, that's going to be kind of our CTE focused. We're also going to have lots of great food from Southwestern and wine from Umpqua and Jamaica. What we call that student work product is actually what we call that. So please join us. And then please send us questions, ideas. We thank you so much for your support and for your willingness to advocate on behalf of all 17 community colleges. So again, thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon.